All right, hello everyone. My name is Disc, and in this video we're mainly going to be talking about our rotation moving forward in the War Within, and a couple of changes that we've had to our spec. If you're new here, thanks for tuning in. This is mainly a Mythic Plus channel, but I do think a lot of what I talk about can carry over into other aspects of play. But in Mythic Plus we are a Mindbender build. This is the meat of our spec. So I wanted to make a dedicated video kind of talking about its rotation and how to maximize it. Before we get into it, I did want to say not only is our Mindbender important, but the timing of the Mindbender is important. One add-on that you might want to get is something like Bigwigs, and the encouragement isn't just use it out of box. You really want to disable as many of the spells as possible, really trying to only leave timers that pertain to your Mindbender active or maybe Rapture. But before we get more into Mindbender, I did want to talk about a standard rotation for our Entropic Rift. So here are our talents. We're mainly going to be talking about the Void Weaver. So I am going to try and talk about this a little more casually, but if anyone has specific questions, please ask. So we are going to talk about our Mindbender more in a moment, but first let's talk about our Entropic Rift. It's pretty easy to use. It is a passive ability, but there are some things to note to kind of maximize it and empower it. So I think on a lot of pulls we might get 2 Mind Blasts, but we'll only get 1 Mindbender. So it kind of has a rotation on its own. But something to think about is we can extend its duration by 3 seconds. That is getting at least 3 of the Void Blasts. I don't think that's hard to do at all, but it is something you have to think about. Make sure you're getting 3. And then the most important part is the Collapsing Void. So the way it works is every bit of penance damage you deal while the void is out, it empowers it by 10%. So a common rotation is I might use a Radiance before I cast Mind Blast, and that is to get the Harsh Discipline. And then with the extension of the 3 seconds with Mind Blast, we can get up to 2 penance. So that's something you want to aim for, is 3 Void Blasts for the extension, and then at least 2 penance for the value. And then something I've been toying with, I think this is a little bit more of an advanced gameplay, but I noticed a lot in my preliminary key runs, or dungeon runs, the void was active after the pull expired, so the collapse of the void missed. So I've been playing with a macro to cancel the totem of the rift, to make sure you get that, that collapse value. And then also something to note is the ticking from the rift and the collapse of the rift both trigger Atonement. And this is a spell we want to be a little more cautious with. It used to be a 16-second cooldown, the Mind Blast, so we could kind of toss it around frivolously, but not anymore. Now it's up to 21. So we do have to think about it a little bit more, but I do think potentially most pulls will fit at least 2 Mind Blasts. So now let's talk about the more exciting part of the rotation, which is our Mindbender. We have some changes to it. It feels quite the same, but there are a lot of changes to it that really demand playing our executes. We get execute resets over here, but the biggest thing is this depth of shadow. So every time we catch a shadow or death sub 20%, we have a high chance, it says, to summon an additional pet. So as long as you're good at getting executes, the Mindbender will feel quite similar. There are some things that changed. I talk about Torments a lot, which I'm going to flash on the screen. It is the main meat of our Mindbender. It triggers off of 3 spells. So Mind Blast is 1, Penance, and Death. The thing with Mind Blast is we're only going to get 1 of these per window, so it's kind of like a free one. But then the Penance and Death, we can get 2 of each. So as a baseline, a more common rotation is going to be at least 5 Torments. And then I'm also going to give an example, a little bit more advanced rotation where we're getting these executes. We can get upwards of 8 Torments. And the reason we want to get all of these Torments is it extends its duration. Every melee swing of the Mindbender gives us mana back. It increases our healing. And then also it triggers our talent Essence Devourer. So every bit that we can keep our Mindbender out longer is just going to increase your output. I am focusing here on damaging, but for the sake of Discipline Priest, a powerful damaging window is a powerful healing window. So we really want to get all of these torments. 5 is a baseline, 8 if we're getting our executes. And then a quick honorable mention when it comes to how I try and maximize my executes and make sure I'm seeing them in the battlefield. I want to splash 2 screenshots here. I'm not going to call out who this is, but this is an example of what I would say is a cluttered nameplate area versus a clean one, which is mine. When it comes to being a disc priest and trying to get these extra executes for the reset, it is so important that we clearly see our nameplates without obstruction. So I really try and minimize everything in this area of the screen. I've turned off the scrolling combat text. I don't really find that it's important. I don't have the target of a cast. I don't have tenths of a number. I don't have a value and a percent. I just have a percent. So I really try to minimize this area of the screen so I can very clearly see when there's an execute. So I use KUI nameplates. I think it's the easiest thing to do. I do have an import if anyone wants to take it, but the best feature for us as an execute class is when an enemy drops into execute range, the nameplate color will change, and it makes it really obvious and visible, and is my best tool when it comes to getting these extra executes. So just as important as our Mindbender rotation, which we're about to get to, is our ramp. So we have to have a strong ramp if we want to have a strong Mindbender window. And there are some rules of thumb that I follow. So in between combat, I'll usually cast a Radiance just to go ahead and bank the proc. And then also before combat begins, I'll also have Atonements ready in party. So you never really want to go into a pull dry. What you want to do is have these Atonements already active in party, so on pull you can start getting your dots out. Usually that's my first order of business. And you want to get a handful of dots out. The more coverage, the better. You can use penance to spread your dots, but at least 3 or 4. And then a part of your ramp is just, there's really no rhyme or reason to it, but you want to get dots out, you want to get Atonements out, and then usually very last thing before I send my Mindbender is I'll flash heal someone else for the binding heals. It atones 2 of us, and then I'll leave a renew on the tank. I really like renews on tanks. And then what that does is it puts at least 3 of us at a long duration atonement. And then that sets us up for our Mindbender, where we just have the freedom to DPS, which is our healing. So Atonements, dots, I like leaving a renew on the tank. I like casting a Radiance for the proc. And then I also, I've been playing Borrowed Time. This really helps get over the hump of our opener. The hardest part is the Mindbender plus the cast of Mind Blast. And the 4 seconds haste here does a lot just to make sure our opener is successful. So my opener looks like a shield, a Radiance, dots, Atonements, a lot of flash heals. I like leaving a renew on the tank. And then now we're set for our Mindbender. And let's go ahead and clip over to the target dummies. First, we're going to talk about a standard common 5 torment window. All right, so here we are at the target dummies, giving an example of a 5 torment window. I'm going to splash on the screen the spell sequence of our opener. Keep in mind, this is an example of an ideal rotation where we're standing still. This isn't often a scenario we're going to find in combat, making sure we utilize things like penance and death to reposition as needed. But for our opener, I'm going to have dots in play. I'm going to have Atonements in party, a Radiance for the proc, a shield for the haste, and that helps us get over the hump of our first 2 spells. And in sequence, we need to play our Mindbender, Mind Blast for the amplifier, Shadow Word Death, and then finally we channel our penance. And then from here, I believe we have 3 Void Blasts. We also want to fit in our Divine Star. And at the tail end of our Mindbender, we're going to have our second Death and second Penance come back available, which we really just have to be vigilant to play. I notice when I watch others, those are the easiest to drop. So making sure we're getting our Torments as soon as those spells have refreshed is going to be the key to maximizing your output. And here's an example. So I have slowed this down a little bit for us, opening with Radiance for the procs, Shield for the haste, Mindbender, Mind Blast, Death, Penance. Noticing the relation of my Mindbender totem with Death and Penance. I have our filler spells in between, not forgetting our Star, and as soon as Penance and Death come available, I play those for their second round of Torments, getting our 4th and 5th Torments. All right, so now let's talk about our 8 Torment window. Off the top, I want to say that this is really only possible some of the time. And in this example, we're going to give myself PI for the haste. I think with PI it's possible, with Lust it's possible. But right now, it's really only possible with a haste boost. But being that Death has a chance to spawn an extra Mindbender, it takes so much more priority in this rotation than anything else. So if I see an opportunity to go for this 8 Torment window, I'm going to Mindbender, Death, Death, Mind Blast, Penance. And the reason I don't bother amplifying the 2 deaths with Mind Blast first is it really doesn't matter. The 10% you're going to get from Schism really isn't worth it in comparison. So potentially we're going to have 3 Mindbenders out at this point, and that's why we want to backload our Mind Blast. We're only going to get 1 of those anyway. We don't really need the amplifier off the death itself, but getting 1 extra Torment while all 3 Mindbenders are out is really going to amplify your output. So Mindbender, Death, Death, you grab them quick. Then you do your single Mind Blast for the Torment, and then your first Penance for the Torment. And then you fall into the standard rotation of your filler spells. We want to Void Blast. We want to make sure we include our Star. And then we have to Penance and Death as soon as they come back available. And for an 8 Torment window, we're getting a Death reset on the front of our window and the back of our window. And what this does is it opens the door for us to get a 3rd Penance. So an 8th Torment off of a 3rd Penance instead of only 2 from our standard window. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this goes. So I have this slowed down a little bit also. We have PI for the haste, Radiance for the procs, and the last thing I want to do is shield myself for the haste, Mindbender, Death, Death, Mind Blast, Penance, and then now we have our filler spells, making sure we include a Divine Star, and then as soon as my Penance comes available, I cast it. I work in an extra blast for the CDR, then my double death, and then I spam a little bit for my final and 8th Torment. So in total, we had 1 Torment from Mind Blast, we had 4 Torments from Shadow Word Death, which gave us access to a 3rd Dark Reprimand for 8 Torments. I think there's an argument to be made where 7 could be better than 8 Torments, similar how we did Death, Death, Mind Blast. I don't really think maybe necessarily you need that 3rd Dark Reprimand. So your last round of Torments could be Death, Death, Dark Reprimand getting 7. There could be more output there potentially. I think time will tell. I think it'll be situation based. I don't think these are things where you can necessarily predict it or plan for it. I think a lot of it is quick reaction time. But again, these are scenarios in an ideal world, in a perfect setting. We don't often have the privilege just to stand still or not reatone. So I think a common rotation we'll find moving forward is after we get our first round of Torments out, we'll have to reatone with a Radiance. Once our first round of Torments are over, likely our ramped entry atonements are going to be dwindling. So we'll work in a Radiance and get our last set of our last set of Torments after the Radiance. So I'm pretty excited to see how this plays in keys. I think with a little bit more haste, we'll have a little bit more uptime on our Mindbender. But I think this is a pretty good example going into the War Within. I think this video will last, showing a basic 5 Torment window and a bonus 8 Torment window, including our Shadow Word Deaths. So if you're new to my channel, thanks for tuning in. Please keep an eye out for more videos in the future. And until next time, Disc.